Hello everyone, and today we're taking a look at the Hatred Assassin and why you should play it in 3.0. Now it has had a bit of a nerf, or should we say, well, 3.1.2 I think it was, where they changed the Assassin. We should say that. Should you roll it in 3.1.2? No changes are coming in 3.2.1 to the Assassin. And there's no major changes, at least announced changes at the moment to the Assassin. They did just change it, and our big nerf was to our range. Now, we're still one of the most mobile melee DPS in the game. We are the most mobile. We're not tied to anything. We don't have to use any channeled abilities. We have a little bit of range, although it has been nerfed. We can be 10 meters away from the boss, so it is helpful on fights like Torque, so we don't lose as much uptime in terms of our DPS as other classes who have to be away from Torque for longer periods of time, or they have to be, you know, within melee range to do any real damage. We can still apply our dots. It is the dot spec. It is the big bad dot spec. The dot spreading is awesome. For AoE, it is one of my favorites actually. It is one of the best ones, probably in terms of overall DPS. It's not too bad. I mean, the power techs are way ahead in terms of the melee. It's unfair to compare melee and range DPS numbers, I think. So, in terms of melee DPS, the power techs are probably the top at the moment. Power techs, pretty untouchable at the moment, far out in front of everything else. The Assassin is not bad though, and you have to get out of this habit of thinking just because the damage class isn't top doesn't mean it is not worth it. I mean, the Assassin is pretty good. It's actually not too bad. The Assassin DPS, so not bad, but where the Assassin excels is in dealing with certain boss mechanics. There are certain boss mechanics which are terrible for power techs. Power techs are going to struggle with them. And the Assassin is one of the best all-round classes. It's mobility and it's a little bit of range that they're given. It's not as much as we had before, but it's still an advantage, particularly on certain fights. You know, fights like Sword Squadron is really good for Assassins. Underlurker, we're still pretty good on that. We can spread our dots. Still get our dots spread off on 2 of the Lurkerlings. Although most of the time we just get told to stay on the boss because we're melee and we're light armored. We also have very, very good survivability. Of all the melee DPS, you'd probably say the Guardian arguably probably has slightly more, although it is pretty tight between ourselves and the Guardian. Although we do have resilience, or whatever, Shroud it's called on the Assassin, using the shadow terms. Shroud or resilience, we'll call it Shroud. Fuck it, we use Shroud. Shroud is one of the best DPS cooldowns in the game. You could flat out ignore mechanics with that if you want to. Like, you can stand in the red circle on Torque and it will just resist it. You can also do things like take the really huge grenade. It is more useful to soak the really huge grenade with it. You're not a burden to the healer. If a shadow gets a really huge grenade, or the not so huge grenade on Sword Squadron, we just, you know, say, oh well, you know, we kind of hope that their resilience is on cooldown, or their shroud, should we say, is on cooldown. They pop that. You also get it when you stealth as well. You get 2 seconds of it thanks to utility, which is pretty nice. It's good for stealth rezzing. Stealth rezzing is being nerfed a lot in 3.0. There's a lot of AoE damage going out that prevents us from stealth rezzing, so it's a bit less effective than it used to be at the moment. But the Shadow does bring that to a raid. So you've got to look at, a lot of people look at DPS, what they bring in terms of damage potential. Shadows bring that little bit more. They bring the ability to teleport as well. You've got Phase Walk, should we say, is awesome for getting out of things quickly. Things that you need to get out of quickly. It's very, very good in fights against Sword Squadron HM for the gravity. You get pulled in, you can teleport safely away from the group and, you know, pop a cooldown, which is quite nice. We've also got our deflection, which makes us, we can be immune to stuns, and we're immune to all stuns. I think all stuns, roots, and movement incapacitating effects, which is, again, is very good, again, on fights like Torque HM. If we get, you know, we get stunned, we can use our breakout and we can become immune to stuns for a few seconds, which is pretty nice, actually. It's good, more useful in PvP. than in PvE. But again, in terms of sustained damage, we are pretty good. A lot of people compare Hatred to Deception. Hatred is probably, most fights, Hatred is the preferred spec in PvE. Deception is more of a PvP, should we say, spec, due to the fact that you've got that nice low slash. That's really useless in PvE. Pretty much useless in PvE. Well, useful for questing, but useless against most bosses, or they're not stunnable. But pretty useful in PvE, so that's one of the main reasons. The AoE is fantastic. You're spreading out your dots. You can spread out your Discharge and your Creeping Terror with your, what's it called again? Death Field. That's it, Death Field. And then you've got your, I can't remember what it's called. Lacerate. There it is. The thing I spam all the time as a tank. Your Lacerate, which again is a very nice ability. You get a nice utility for that. With Deception, you have Lacerate boosted, so you only have Lacerate to spam in Deception. Deception's not, they're not that far away in terms of AoE with the dot spread, but the dot spread is nice if you can, you know, spread dots on certain ads and then go attack other ads where it tends to come into, you know, it comes into things, and you can use things like CC and things to lock down. If you think about those snipers in Ravagers that annoy a lot of the healers, people tend to line of sight them, but if the group doesn't, you can run up, stealth, CC some of those snipers while everyone else is in combat. You can be a little bit smart with the Shadow. The Shadow is a very smart class. You also offer a buff to the healers as well. You can have your Shadow's Shadow Shelter, which is pretty good for the healers. Again, if you're the only Shadow in the group, I would take that utility, and if the healers are going to be standing roughly in one place for the majority of the fight, then it is very, very useful, that ability. Again, what we bring to the raid in terms of our utilities is quite nice. We do bring that nice little, we bring that ability to soak damage, which is good. We can take spike damage. We're very, very good on fights with spike damage. Fights we don't do so well on is Underlurker, which is a lot of AoE damage, because we do rely on one kind of defensive cooldown. Really, one big defensive cooldown, should we say, for most of our mitigation. But on fights for the spike damage, again, if we look at the bonus boss, Depths of Manan, HM, that fight, we really are awesome on that fight. You know, we can mitigate the demo probes. We just resilience and resist the demo probe. Even with the debuff, even with the damage debuff, we can get at least 2 of them still with the debuff, as long as our resilience is off cooldown. Again, we can use our stealth as well for that. So we are very, very useful on those fights. It is my favourite DPS class, if you can't tell. This is my favourite. Just for the sheer flexibility. Again, we can be away from the boss, we can be away from Torque as long as we've got our dots up. It's fine for us to be away from the boss. We can reapply our dots while we're away from the boss as well. We've got a 30-meter range on Creeping Terror still. The other 2 have 10-meter ranges, but again, we can just bring that. Also, our Phase Walk for getting out of the fire is pretty nice on Torque as well. You know, if you've ever been melee DPS on Torque, you'll know how bad it is. I just DPS'd it tonight on my Power Tech, and it was tough. So the Power Tech, yes, will do probably higher numbers, but the Power Tech lacks the survivability, I think, of the Shadow, and the utility and the sort of raid-wide utility that the Shadow brings. I think that's gonna be, you gotta be assess those things when you're taking DPS classes. We probably want one melee, and I would say Shadow is probably the one you want in terms of for the raid. Get a Shadow. I would say the Power Tech, yeah, they're gonna bring the numbers. But, you know, as a healer, you're going to be healing them a lot. We can leave a Shadow to soak certain mechanics, and we can get them to ignore fight mechanics, which is quite nice, actually. It's quite a nice class, and again, being a nice stealth class, I'm a fan of stealth classes. I don't like fighting trash. Big fan of the stealth classes. Deception was a cool spec, but, I mean, Hatred, I got used to it now. I mean, I didn't like Hatred at first, or what was it called before? I can't remember what it's called before they renamed it Hatred. What was it again? Madness, it was. Madness we did. Which I didn't like it, but I liked some of the changes that they made, like making the Demolish, now it was Crushing Darkness back then, instant cast. It's now Demolish, basically replaces our Crushing Darkness. which is quite a nice ability. I like the fact that, again, it's instant cast. It costs no force. It's good for force regen. A lot of people debate about the force regen situation. My philosophy is that you don't want to run your force into the ground, because you want to have enough force to reapply your dots. That's key. Okay, you want Death Field used on cooldowns. You want enough force to apply Death Field and reapply Creeping Terror and Discharge when they come off the target. That's the goal. At the other end, you don't want to sit on 100% force, because capping your force is bad for DPS. Really, it's like capping your rage as a Guardian or a Juggernaut, should we say? Capping your rage is bad. You're just losing DPS. You should always be spending force, but you don't want to spend too much force. You don't want to run it down so you can't reapply your dots. So there's always that little balancing act. You always want to keep it, maybe when it gets below 40%, start saber striking to bring it back up, but don't bring it back up fully. Just bring it back up to maybe 70-80% and then go back to your spamming your, what is it, Thrash. Thrash tends to be your spam. As well, we also, for our utility as well, we've got some nice off-spec healing, which is nice. We do a lot of leeching effects, Leeching Strike. If it crits, awesome. It's a good heal. That's a really good heal. It's like a sort of normal healer's heal. You know, can heal us for like 5 or 6k, depending on the crit. Again, you know, we can get up to 7 or 8k if we get better gear. We also get the redirected life from Death Field as well, which is pretty nice. We also have Overcharged Saber, which again are melee attacks heal us. So we've got those options. As a soloing class, they're pretty good, and as a PvP class, they're pretty hard to kill as well, because you know, they can stealth, of course, which is always the ultimate thing in PvP. And again, Hatred is alright. Most people prefer Deception because it has a bit more CC, but Hatred is viable as well in PvP. Hatred is perfectly viable. You get your dot spreads for the AoE. If people run away from you, you dot them up as well. A lot of people don't run away from a melee DPS, tend to just stun them. But again, it's like, for PvP, Hatred is viable. Perfectly viable. Your leeching abilities give you survivability as well, which is survivability is the king in PvP, really. You don't want to be dying. Again, if you die fast, like Marauders do a lot of damage, but you know, they're easy to kill in PvP. So hopefully they'll change that with patch 3.2.1. I'm recording this prior to that patch, so hopefully people say, oh, Marauders have a heal as well. Yeah, their heal is, well, they're going to change that heal. I don't know what they're going to change it to. We'll take a look at the Marauder maybe when patch 3.2.1 comes out, but we are recording this prior to patch 3.2.1, so that's why we're saying that we have better survivability. It may change, I don't know, I've not played the Marauder in a while. Again, my Marauder sits with no weapons. So anyway, that is all for this video. Thank you for joining me, and again, the question is, yes, it is the best melee DPS in the game, in my opinion. That is my opinion on it, so go out there and roll yourself an assassin. Very fun to level as well. Fun class to level. Most fun class to level, I think. So anyway, go out there and roll an assassin. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you again soon, and goodbye.